So welcome everybody to Amplifying Animal Voices. I am really excited about this workshop. Thank you all for being here. We have some amazing speakers today. One of our speakers, Jason, unfortunately couldn't make it. He is in the middle of an animal transport, helping some animals get somewhere that they need to go. So we definitely understand that. And we'll invite him to come back at a later date. But I'm really excited about Bobby and Riki being here and really excited to learn a lot from them. I met Riki at Full Circle. That's the first sanctuary I ever went to. And it kind of opened my door to sanctuaries and what they do and everything like that. And Bobby, I've been following online for a little while. Just earlier is the first time we've actually gotten to like talk back and forth kind of face to face on Zoom. So excited to learn from him too. Can't wait to get started. Before we start, I just want to let everybody know that this is presented by Animal Activism Mentorship. Animal Activism Mentorship is
You're muted, Trey.
Oh, sorry about that. Animal Activism Mentorship is a program that offers free mentorship one-on-one for people. If you're a new activist or if you've been doing activism for a while and you want to like ramp up your activism or whatever the case may be, even if you just need support as an activist, AAM can help. If anybody wants a free mentor or knows anybody who could use a free mentor, you can go to animalactivismmentorship.com and sign up for free. We also do free workshops like we're doing right now. The workshops are always free. So yeah, follow our Facebook page on the events column and you will stay up to date on our events. Also like to let you all know real quick for anybody that's in the area, there will be a tour going on in Florida, an animal rights tour through AAM. And then there's also one coming up in Chicago. Both are over the summer, and we're really hoping to achieve with these events, not only getting some stuff done for the animals, but also fostering an environment where people can learn, especially brand new activists. So if anybody's interested in that, just let me know. If you're interested in attending or anything like that, I'd be happy to give you some more information on that. So now we will kick it to our first speaker. I'm so excited to introduce Riki. She's awesome, and I'll let her say a little bit more about herself and get us started.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in this evening. My name is Riki Higgins, and I am currently the Education and Outreach Coordinator at Full Circle Farm Sanctuary in Warm Springs, Georgia. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I come originally from an education background. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in special education and taught humans with severe and profound disabilities in the high school setting for a few years before moving into sanctuary work. Came to work here at Full Circle back in 2017. Initially as a member of the caregiving staff, and then eventually started working on our education, outreach, social media presence, and a few other hats that I wear here at the sanctuary. My pronouns are both she and they, so you can feel free to use either of those for me. I know, I can't remember if Trey mentioned it, but if anyone has questions about what I'm speaking about today, do jot them down. We're gonna have a chance to do Q&A after both of the talks today. So I'd love to hear any questions that you guys have about my talk today. So what I'd like to speak out today is refuting the concept of voicelessness among non-human animals in animal rights activism. And I'd sort of like to set the tone by playing a video that I believe was originally made by Miko Brown, who works at Farm Sanctuary in New York. It's pretty short. but I believe it is pretty relevant and also just one of my favorite pieces to discuss with people. And I believe Trey has that video. So I'd like to play that first.
Hello, this is Kamika speaking, and I'm the creator of Sanctuary Community Project. I will explain what exactly Sanctuary Community Project is in another video. In this video, I want to specifically talk about human relationships with non-human animals. In our relations with non-human animals, specifically formerly farmed animals, we often speak of this notion of showing empathy or being kind or extending compassion. When I personally hear that language, I feel as though those terms fail to capture a critical part of our relationship with non-human animals, and that is our complicity in their suffering and oppression. Words like empathy, kindness, and compassion seem to carry this connotation of this benevolent and charitable Good Samaritan who sees that another is suffering and comes to their aid, an act of altruism. That language does not seem to adequately capture that Good Samaritan and the community of which they are a part are responsible for that suffering, and that Good Samaritan exists in a community that is set up to oppress and inflict harm and suffering on this other individual. One possible reframing of this perspective is one of a relationship where the human individual recognizes their complicity in the harm caused to the non-human individual through the norms of their community and takes deliberate action to challenge and confront those norms, examine their own complicity, and continuously be deliberate to ensure that they are not perpetuating those norms and causing further suffering. Taking it a step further, that perspective also takes into account the ways in which the existence of those oppressive norms in that community also negatively impacts the human animal individual in addition to the non-human animal individual. That deliberate intention not to inflict further harm and suffering is then reframed as an act of solidarity to cease participating in a system based on oppressive norms that damage the whole community. One could say that the first perspective is an idea of a human savior for non-human animals, whereas the second perspective is movement in the direction of a human accomplice working together in solidarity with non-human animals. The language of being an accomplice potentially offers a valuable way of conceptualizing a more counter-oppressive approach to our relations with non-human animals. It implies the recognition of a structure of oppressive norms that are perpetuating this harm and suffering, and that taking action that contradicts those norms is, in essence, in defiance of a status quo. Acting as an accomplice takes it even further than acting as an ally, who might be one to save or offer support. The language of an accomplice speaks to the recognition of a larger system of oppression and the myriad ways in which we are each entangled in and impacted by that system. Acting as an accomplice means being committed to doing the ongoing and often difficult work of dismantling that system. It also shifts the hierarchical relationship between human animals and non-human animals that can often be seen in a savior relationship to a less hierarchical relationship of reparation and solidarity. In short, as Aurora Levins Morales states in her 1998 text, Medicine Stories, solidarity is not a matter of altruism. Solidarity comes from the inability to tolerate the affront to our own integrity of passive or active collaboration in the oppression of others, and from the deep recognition of our most expansive self-interest. From the recognition that, like it or not, our liberation is bound up with that of every other being on the planet, and that politically, spiritually, in our heart of hearts, we know anything else is unaffordable. What would it look like if we were to begin shifting the framing of the animal rights movement and the farm to animal sanctuary movement in that direction? I don't fully know, but it's one of many topics I hope to begin dialoguing about with you as part of Sanctuary Community Project. You could find Sanctuary Community Project on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and the website www.sanctuarycommunityproject.com.
All right. So, unfortunately, I don't believe that Miko Brown ended up doing more with that project, but I think that that video encompasses the perspective that I'm coming from in addressing the topic of refuting voicelessness among non-human animals. So, to broach this topic, a few years ago, probably around 2016, activist circles were very enthused about Anonymous for the Voiceless, well-known organization. A lot of us have probably done actions for them, know people who have worked for them or are still participating with them. Within the name of that organization and their work, the phrase voice for the voiceless was used pretty frequently. Pervasively. I'm sure that I've used it a lot in the past. You see it, still today on a lot of infographics and stuff like that. Viewing oneself as an activist who is acting as the voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. The phrase is not just used in animal rights. It's also used in other spheres of activism, nonprofit work, dealing with other populations. And in my opinion, it encourages a culture of imposing your own narrative instead of listening, representing a group that you're not part of instead of amplifying them, and denying agency to those that you seek to aid and liberate. The fact is, animals do have voices. Human animals have voices and non-human animals have voices. Several people have already spoken on this topic and wrote some great things, so I'm going to read a little bit from Keith Berger's 2018 article, Animals Aren't Voiceless, We're Just Not Listening. And this is published on veganeducationgroup.com. They said, the ableism embedded in animal rights discourse is evident in a common rallying cry used by animal advocates. To be a voice for the voiceless is a sentiment with which many activists within advocacy communities identify. It became common to use the biblical phrase, voice for the voiceless, to refer to animals after a publication of a poem written in 1910 by American poet Ella Wheeler. This poem was radical in its acknowledgement of animal suffering. The phrase "a voice for the voiceless," giving voice to a population that is unable to defend or speak for itself, inevitably conjures the sentiment in Wilcox's poem that the voiceless are physically unable to speak for themselves. But it is wrong to suggest that animals are not telling us what they want. Animals consistently voice preferences and ask for freedom. They speak to us every day when they cry out in pain or try to move away from prods, electrodes, knives, and stun guns. Animals tell us constantly that they want to be out of cages, that they want to be reunited with their families, or that they don't want to walk down a kill chute. Animals express themselves all the time, and many of us know it. Considering animals voiceless betrays an ableist assumption of what counts as having a voice. When animal advocates describe animals as voiceless, even when it is meant simply as a metaphor, it gives power to those who want to view animals as mindless objects. In the long run, activists will help animals more if we treat them as active participants in their own liberation, as the expressive subjects and animal advocates know them to be, remembering that resistance takes many forms, some of which may be hard to recognize from an able-bodied human perspective. Additionally, I want to share this excerpt from Amanda Howdeshell's article, You Aren't a Voice for the Voiceless, on Species Revolution. They write, let me find that. What makes non-human voices so different from ours that causes us to label them voiceless? Is it the lack of language, the lack of verbal speech, the lack of ability to communicate with us? None of these is sufficient because none of them is a blanket statement about all non-human animals, and all of them could be applied to certain humans in certain situations. So, considering these excerpts, when it comes to recognizing animal voices, there are a lot of things which we can recognize in non-human animal populations. Body language, communication styles, and vocalizations take time and effort to learn and become comfortable and familiar with across different species. And I know that when I started in the animal rights sphere a number of years ago, I was not familiar with any of these things within different species other than humans. And it took me a long time to become familiar with different communication styles in different species, and I'm still learning those all the time. But just because someone doesn't speak the same language as me doesn't make them voiceless, right? I'm not someone else's voice, but I can join voices with non-human animals and amplify those voices. I can amplify their voices by helping others to understand their different species communication styles. I can create media that showcases the ways in which non-human animals communicate with each other and with us. And I can help spread those messages. Prioritizing our own voices over the actual victims of the situation continues to make the animal rights movement human-centric and can actually lead to animals being harmed through a number of different things. This can lead to the treatment of animals as a theoretical concept or a prop, right? When we talk about non-human animals just as sort of a monolith, as an idea or a concept rather than real individuals, you may have perspectives that are skewed, such as idolizing all non-human animals as perfect angels. And that means that we don't take into account animals who are aggressive or unfriendly, who also deserve their voices amplified. Prioritizing our own voices over non-human animals can lead to the misunderstandings of an animal's need for care or treatment, right? If you're not making an effort to learn different species language, communication styles, body language, you might not be able to recognize when they are in need of medical aid, when they are in need of other basics, and can put them in a harmful situation. For instance, rushing to get footage of an animal in distress instead of getting them immediate medical help, or completely missing or ignoring a non-human animal in distress because we haven't taken the time to learn how they act when they are comfortable versus in distress or having medical issues. We can also slip into situations where we disrespect animals' physical and bodily autonomy and privacy. And this is definitely something that I was complicit in early in my time in the animal rights sphere. I'm sure that I have taken my fair share of invasive selfies with animals by ignoring their bodily autonomy and their voice towards me, letting me know, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this or that. So I'm sure back in Facebook, you probably could find pictures of me with non-human animals where, if I look back now, I can say, hey, I can recognize that this animal was uncomfortable and I wasn't listening to them because I'm making the assumption that they're voiceless. Additionally, it can lead to putting animals in situations like bringing them to crowded events. I think sometimes, even today, when someone from a sanctuary goes to an event, some people will ask, hey, are you bringing any of your residents to this event? And, we're viewing them as, props or just, an object to represent this movement rather than an individual who is going to be uncomfortable in this situation. Prioritizing our own voice over non-human animals can lead to making animals' last moments more stressful and unpleasant than they might have been otherwise during a rescue or a vigil. I believe that originally when Vigil started, not only was the intent to bear witness, but also to bring comfort to animals during their last moments. And now a lot of times these events can be very chaotic and lead to unnecessary stress and fear on the part of the animals who are already experiencing something unpleasant, because humans want to insert themselves into the situation and make it a human-centric thing. Additionally, misunderstanding and not educating ourselves about non-human animals' language, voice, and body language can lead to sharing media that perpetuates animals in dangerous situations, because to the untrained eye it looks cute or entertaining. I see a lot of videos on Facebook, Instagram showing odd couples, animals of different species together, doing something together. And a lot of times these are staged or putting these animals in a dangerous situation. And to someone who knows who these, how these animals' body language works, you can tell that they're stressed out, they're in a dangerous situation. I'm sure all of us have received videos from friends, relatives who say, "Oh, I know you love animals. Look at this picture of like a bunny in the sink getting a bath." But if you know rabbits and you know what their communication style is like and how their body language is, you'll know that this rabbit is in a dangerous situation. They're shutting down, they're stressed out, and it's not cute to someone who's gotten to the time to know them and recognize their voice, even though it's not verbal. You'll also see people putting predator and prey species together. And while they might be acting friendly in a video, if you understand the way that these non-human animals function, you will know that it's a dangerous situation in which they could immediately turn on each other and harm each other because of the different ways in which they communicate and how those communication styles could clash. So those are all issues with operating under the assumption that you are a voice for a voiceless community. It can lead to all sorts of miscommunications and unintentional victimization of non-human animals. So all that in front of us, let's talk a little bit about different species and their voices. I work at a sanctuary with over 160 different residents. And so since my job is to share their stories, I spend a lot of time with them. So let's talk a little bit about, just briefly, some species and the ways that they communicate. So cows, we have 12 cows that live here at the sanctuary. They definitely can be vocal. Everybody knows a cow moos. It might sound a little bit different than, the noise you might hear from a kid's toy, but cows can definitely be vocal when they're expressing their needs or emotions. Cows use their head a lot to communicate body language and to indicate whether or not you are allowed to come closer to them or stay away from them. A lot of people misinterpret cows saying no, because in humans, this means yes, but for cows, this means no. So I have seen, videos where a human is interacting with a cow and the cow is clearly trying to communicate, "Hey, I would like you to stay away from me." And the human in the video is like, "Oh, look at this cute cow. This cow loves me. This cow is enthused about what I'm being here with this cow." And the cow is trying to communicate, "Hey, I'm uncomfortable. I'd like for you to leave this space." Cows can be pretty breathy. They do a lot of snorting and a lot of just sort of small, subtle physical signals to communicate whether they are or aren't comfortable with you. So pigs are another species that's really fun. If you spent any time with pigs, you might be familiar with hot panting. And that is when a pig is really enthused or excited to see you. They will often communicate this through a really breathy panting noise that they'll come up and greet you with, which is always super fun. Pigs have a really wide vocal range. They can have very low grumbling voices, and they can reach extremely high decibels, and pretty much everything in between. And I think pigs can be fairly vocal because they have low vision a lot of the time. If you watch two pigs have a conversation, their heads will usually be right next to each other, and they'll talk the whole time. And they're very, very physical with each other, and recognize a pretty strict hierarchy within their social groups. Frequently, when it comes to misinterpreting, sorry, my lights went out there. That's okay. When it comes to misinterpreting pig voices, frequently people mistake their communication style for aggression. And I've learned even more recently, violence. A lot of humans make the assumption that pigs are being violent when they are simply trying to communicate in a pretty average way. Chickens are awesome. Chickens talk a lot. Chickens are much more vocal than cows and pigs. But again, their communication style is drastically different than voices in humans. And so some people are pretty off-put by it or find it hard to interpret. Chickens do have at least 27 distinct vocalizations that they use to indicate different things, but there's probably a lot more than that. And you have documented instances of chickens being able to assign names to other species that they are familiar with. If you spend any particular time with a flock, it's likely that they're going to give you a name. And they've got a lot of different things that they're always watching out for. Roosters always communicating with each other to let each other know, hey, what's going on in this area? What's going on in your area? Let's check in with each other. They're very, very vocal. So it is almost laughable to think about being a voice for, say, a rooster because they talk so much. Roosters are super cool. Goats. In my particular experience, the goats here at our sanctuary are a lot less vocal and a lot more physical when it comes to communication and their voices. They use a lot of physical body movement. It's easy to get physical with them in order to communicate with them. They use their horns to communicate things, both in terms of play and sorting out disagreements with folks in their social circles. And they like to make sneezing noises to communicate as well, which is always very interesting. And then I'm biased. My very favorite species to hang out with are turkeys, always have been. And turkeys are super cool. They have lots of varied vocalizations, just like other birds. And they also are very physical in their communication style. I recently posted a video of a couple of the girls here talking, and it was a really heated, really spirited conversation where they were really irritated with each other. And in that particular instance, you can really see parallels to human communication styles. We're not always so drastically different, but especially I think when a species looks so different from a human, people are reluctant to get to know them and recognize their voices. So it's just a little bit about a couple different species and how they communicate. And I am by no means an expert about any of these guys. These are just things that I've learned through personal experience with them. I didn't write this down, but alpacas are very, very quiet most of the time, but mostly when it comes to vocalizations, they do a lot of humming. I try to, when I spend time with other species, I try to learn by imitating other species vocalizations or body movements and seeing what the reaction is. And sometimes I feel like I'm the parrot in their home. You know how, parrots like to imitate what we do. And if I'm with a group of whoever species, I feel like I'm operating like a parrot in their social circle. But it helps me learn and recognize how do they use their voice, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, and what can I do to better communicate with them so that I can create media that communicates what they're trying to communicate to me. So how can we amplify the voices of other species? How can we align ourselves with them? And just like that video that I played at the beginning, operate as an accomplice with them with the goal of collective liberation? What steps can we take? So I've got a couple suggestions. Number one, take the time to learn how other species speak and what their body language means. It's going to help refute misconceptions about the ways in which different species act, the concept that there's no meaning behind what they do and say, and that they are just objects. Number two, create personal relationships with formerly farmed animals beyond simply meeting and taking a picture with them. Learning about their story and sharing it in detail is pretty much the base level of responsibility that we have when we meet another victim of the animal agriculture industry. And so that's something that we want to do beyond just saying, hey, I met this pig and this is cool. This is a cute picture of us together. I need to learn about what they went through and share that. And through that, I am amplifying their voice and what they went through. I think when people get very excited about meeting different species, and that's awesome. I'm still excited about meeting different folks that come to the sanctuary all the time. But instead of the instinct being, I want a picture of myself with them, I try to make sure the instinct is, let me tell other people, other humans, what they went through and decenter myself from this narrative. Number three, when we create media, let's try to create it thoughtfully. When I create media for our different platforms here at the sanctuary, I try to avoid human imagery as much as possible. I try to make sure that I'm not, if I come across, a cute video and, just on my personal page, I'm sharing stuff, I try to make sure that I look, where's that video coming from? Am I accidentally sharing something from a farm? Or am I actually sharing a video that looks cute but is a dangerous situation for the animals that are depicted or portrayed? Right, kind of that odd couple stuff that I talked about before. Number four, being conscious of whether our activism is human-centric or other species-centric. Is my activism about myself, or is it about the individuals that are experiencing the oppression that we're talking about? And number five, recognize the non-human animals as activists and ourselves as accomplices in their liberation. We try to avoid a benevolent, I rescued, I did, my accomplishment mindset when we're participating in offering to help and aid other species. Here at our sanctuary, we try to frame things as our opportunity to care for and serve the residents here rather than our heroics for offering them a home, and focusing on residents who orchestrated their own escapes whenever possible. So that is a little bit about my perspective on amplifying animal voices and refuting the concept of voicelessness. So I hope that that was helpful in some way. If you've got questions, jot them down. And after our next speaker, I'd be happy to answer any. But I appreciate everybody who tuned in today, and I'm looking forward to our next speaker. So thank you all for your time.
Thanks so much, Riki. That was that gave us so much to think about. I think as activists, we're all still just continually learning, and I'm so blessed to be able to learn from great people with different perspectives. Before we move on, Riki, could you share how people can keep up with you and keep up with Full Circle?
Sure. You can find Full Circle Farm Sanctuary online at fullcirclefarmsanctuary.org. You can also follow us on Instagram Twitter, TikTok, Patreon, Facebook, and YouTube as well. And if you're in the Georgia area, we do have volunteer and internship opportunities, including social media internships, which is really a chance to learn about creating this type of media. And so I think that's a cool opportunity.
Yeah, it definitely is. I've gotten a chance to volunteer there a couple of times back when I lived a little closer, and yeah, it was a blessing to be able to hang out with everybody there. The animals are so cool, and yeah. Please follow, if nothing else, please follow Full Circle on TikTok. Riki does such a good job with the TikTok. I love watching them. Riki does a great job of just communicating all these things that she just communicated in long form in these little short form videos. I just think it's so educational and a great way to teach people about animals and amplify their voices, just like Riki talked about. So yeah, thanks again, Riki. If you have any questions about Riki's talk, just jot them down and remember them, and we're gonna get all those answered at the end. But right now I want to kick it over to Bobby.
Thank you very much. My name is Bobby. I'm an organizer and photographer for Animal Save Movement and LA Animal Save. And so today I want to talk about how we can make our activism, or how we're sort of speaking for, not for animals, but sharing their voices most effectively. And I'm going to speak about photography and cinematography because that's my activism. But I'm going to touch on a lot of commonalities and through lines that I think that all activism shares, in a way of we can be more effective and make people more willing to listen to us. So let me see. I need the share screen thing. All right, and okay, so can you guys hear me? Just want to make sure you guys. Okay. So like I said, I'm an organizer with LA Animal Save and Animal Save Movement. And what we do is we hold vigils outside of slaughterhouses. And what we do there is bearing witness. And that term comes from a Leo Tolstoy quote, which says, whenever someone is suffering, do not give in to that initial urge to flee. Instead, get closer, get as close as you can to the one who's suffering and do something to help. And that's essentially our philosophy, that we go and we bear witness to the animals that are arriving at slaughterhouses. And we do what we can in that moment. It's usually not rescuing animals. It's usually offering them water, because the pigs will have been on the truck anywhere from 24 to 60 hours without food or water. The moment they get on the trucks, they're never getting food or water again. So we'll give them water, we'll show them kindness and compassion, and try to comfort them, try to create a loving environment for them to arrive in before they have to go into the slaughterhouse. And so for me, amplifying animal voices as an organizer and a photographer for LA Animal Save means amplifying their experience as factory farm animals, getting that experience across to people who are unwilling or have not had an opportunity to see what the truth behind our animal agriculture industry. So to spread awareness of their condition and experience, that 99% of the human population who choose to look away, keep it out of sight, out of mind. This is what bearing witness at vigils allows me to do, most effectively through photography. When I started photographing animals at vigils, I didn't really know what I was doing, and so a lot of my photos were sort of these generic photos, not this one, but they started out as these generic photos that weren't really telling any unique perspective. They were just sort of giving a general idea of what people already sort of knew about animal agriculture. They knew that pigs arrived on trucks, and that's kind of what I was showing. And while I was getting the images out there, how effective it was in getting what their experience was across to people, I can't say that I was really reaching anyone, or at least portraying the truth behind it. And so it was my first vigil, and I had this very profound experience as an animal rights activist, even more so than filming on slaughterhouse kill floors or in factory farms with Sean Monson, which I did undercover for 3 years. And that was when the first time I saw a truck come around the corner, and that truck brought with it the weight of its reality that I had only seen on a screen. And when you see documentaries or YouTube videos, they're powerful, but they are deniable, at least more easily deniable, because all I have to do is turn the screen off. And then that, whatever that was, is separated by distance and time, because most likely it's not live. But when that truck came around the corner, there was the truth presented to me front and center and undeniable. It was a truck with 200 6-month-old pigs who were about to die, and they were only inches from my face. They're 200 intelligent, emotional, imaginative individuals with inner lives as rich and connected as all of ours. And seeing that truck pull away into the slaughterhouse is the first time I ever saw animals enter a slaughterhouse. I was sort of struck with this painful truth. And that is that I don't know what happens after we die. I don't know if there's an afterlife or a heaven or reincarnation. Maybe one of those is true, but I don't know. But what I do know is that each of us gets to be the individuals that we are now on this planet once, right? We get one chance to experience as much kindness, compassion, and love as we can before it's over. And when I was watching those animals into that slaughterhouse, I realized that was their one chance. And every single time the truck is just another 200 more animals, and that was their one chance, 6 months of suffering, and then it's over. So I now had this idea that I wanted to get across, like this is what's happening. This really difficult truth that I witnessed is what I wanted people to understand. Not that just trucks of pigs are showing up, right? That each one is real and not coming back. And so I remember reading this book, Dominion by Matthew Scully, and I was struck by this one verse in the book that says, factory farming isn't just killing, it's negation. It's the complete denial of an animal as its own being with their own needs and nature. And so I realized what I wanted to do and how I could be most effective with my photography or my messaging is do less photojournalism style and more portraits, showing each pig as an individual whose experience was different than the one in the last picture, and whose suffering was different than the one in the last picture and any other pigs you're going to see. And I'm able to do this by keeping my perspective. And I think this comes to making our activism most effective, because vigils are psychologically taxing, and a lot of people don't think that they're worth it, and that there's this level of futility because we're not saving animals, at least not at pig vigils. We actually do rescue a lot of chickens at chicken vigils. And part of that's true. But what I think is most important whenever we're doing activism with animals or about animals, we have to make it about those animals that are suffering in front of us. We have to make it not about the negative feelings that we're having, not about any thoughts about this enormous enemy that animal agriculture that we're seeing. And if we're ever going to be able to end slaughterhouses or end factory farming, I can't make it about that when I'm there, because then I lose my effectiveness and my connection to what I'm doing for the animals. And therefore I can't be as effective photographer. I can't be as effective speaker. I can't speak to others as effectively as I could have, because I wasn't present. I wasn't able to be. And if we're going to be effective in anything we're doing, we have to be fully present in what we're doing. And so when when people see my photos, I want them to struggle with this paradox of seeing something that's shocking, not just brutality, but emotionally shocking. And at the same time, facing what they already knew. Most people deep down already know that something terrible is happening to animals. And the interesting thing is that most people, I would say there's not another topic that more of the human race would agree on than we should be kind to animals, or we shouldn't harm animals, right? There's this paradox and this duality in all of us. And I remember going through social media, and this was recently after working with Sean, and Sean was telling me how, you know, when you get something, an image, or you film something that's very graphic, if you want to put that in a documentary, a lot of times distribution or producers are going to tell you, no, we don't want that. You can't have that in there. That's too much. And then Sean is saying, well, okay, but this, and as documentary filmmakers, what we're doing is we're working in the medium of truth. And so how much truth do you want me to take out of it? But there's something really interesting in this argument, because how much truth do you want to take out of it to make yourself heard by people that don't want to hear it? And this is a really fine line that you have to walk when we're doing activism, no matter what your activism is. And a few days later, I was on social media, and I keep seeing a lot of posts posing questions like, how can we be louder? Because we're right. And so how can we be louder and, you know, force people to hear what we're saying? And I think a more important question than that is, how can we be more effective? Right? How is it more important that we're right, or more important that we're heard? And I think this comes down to what we're trying to accomplish. And what we're trying to accomplish, first of all, is to be heard. And that, when I see a lot of activists getting burned out, and this is really about, what are your objectives? What do you think is possible when you're doing outreach? How can I, do you really think you're going to go out there and make somebody vegan by just talking to them once? Because as vegans, we've already made that change. And so when we look back, we think that change was rather quick, and that it just kind of happened overnight. I wasn't vegan, then I was. But when we think like that, when we say things like, oh, Earthlings, I watched Earthlings and that made me vegan, what we're doing is we're disregarding the complexity of our entire life experience. Every movie we watched as a kid, Bambi, Dumbo, Babe, every pet you had or your friends had, every positive interaction you had with an animal were all part of that journey to becoming vegan. It wasn't just Earthlings that made you vegan. Earthlings was just the last thing that made you vegan. And rarely when we're doing outreach are we going to be that last thing for somebody. So what are our expectations? And having reasonable expectations is what will keep us from getting upset, and therefore less effective when we're speaking on behalf of animals. And I see this a lot with like Save Squares or Cubes of Truth. People get stumped or they get angry because, oh, I had a 5-minute conversation with somebody and they didn't want to become vegan. Well, let's say that person's 35 years old that they were talking to. So that means they've had at least 35,000 meals in their lifetime, almost all of them having animal products in them, right? So that means there's 35,000 examples of conditioning against your 5-minute conversation, right? So again, don't get upset if you can't get them to become vegan. What you're trying to do is just clear off a little bit of dirt so a little more light gets in through the windows. We want, maybe you're not the last person, maybe you don't get all the dirt off, but somebody will, but you have to help. We have to create these little shifts in consciousness as much as possible. And it's you know, it's hard when, oh, sorry. When we see these things like at a vigil, and you know, people get angry and they get upset because, especially new vegans, because as new vegans, we're constantly learning new things every day that's upsetting us. Oh, I didn't know about this. Oh, I didn't know about frog farms. Oh, I didn't know about foie gras. Oh, I didn't know about this. Every day for like the first year we're vegan, we're learning about something new and we're getting angry, right? And so we want to direct our anger at somebody. But when in your lifetime has anger ever been the best choice you've made for resolving a situation or getting a point across. We have to sort of, if we see something that upsets us, if someone says something that upsets us, like, oh, well, I like steak too much, we have to just wait for a moment, right? Give yourself time to dig out wisdom. Don't react on that initial emotional response to be angry, and say, okay, this person who's saying that, first of all, they don't know you. They probably just met you that day. So it's not personal. And we have to realize where they're coming from. Where they're coming from is where you were not that long ago. Right. And so it's hard, but we have to have understanding for people. We have to meet them where they are and understand, okay, I'm not going to make this person vegan, most likely. It would be great if we could all do, if I could make one photo, if I could take one photo so amazing that it just, anyone who saw it became vegan. That'd be great, but that's totally irrational. You can't think like that. And that's what will create burnout. And that happens a lot. And then we become very ineffective in telling the story of animals and what's happening and getting people to listen to us. Why? Because we're angry and we're tired and people aren't listening to us and we're right. But remember, when you weren't vegan, you were certain you were right. And so I'm not saying this as like, this is the only way to do outreach, or the only way to do activism is this one philosophy of, sort of kindness and understanding, right? I understand that there's different types of activism. LA Animal Save, we're a love-based organization. So we have no hate for truck drivers, no hate for slaughterhouse workers, no hate for factory farm workers, because this does not exist because there are factory farm workers or slaughterhouse workers or slaughterhouses. All of this exists because human beings want to eat meat, right? Our enemy, when we break it all down, is not factory farms, is not slaughterhouses, and it's not ranchers or slaughterhouse owners. It's this unconscious cruelty that through conditioning replaced true compassion and called itself humane and necessary. And that's the most important thing. It's nobody, I would say 99% of people or more that are eating meat are not doing it because they're bad or they're evil. And we're not vegan because we're good or we're just. Right? Again, the world isn't binary like that. And so we have to understand, that they're not doing this because they're bad people. They're doing it because they think they have to. They think that it's necessary. And so when you're telling somebody you shouldn't be eating animals, you shouldn't be eating dairy and things like that, what you're telling them is they're hearing, I'm wrong for doing something I'm supposed to do. And my entire life I've been told I'm supposed to do, and 10 times the amount of specialists that are experts that I've read about have said, this is what I'm supposed to do. And it becomes frustrating, obviously. And the vegan message can work against us because while it's true, we have this message that says veganism will pretty much solve every major crisis that's facing us. Veganism not alone will solve climate change, but there's no solution to climate change without it. Whole food, plant-based vegan diet will reverse almost every chronic illness that's killing people in the world. Diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stroke. I know this personally because I used to weigh 300 pounds and I was type 2 diabetic. And I reversed all of that with a plant-based diet. So you go to someone and say, oh, I've got an answer to every major problem. And it's just go vegan. I mean, of course, they're going to be skeptical, right? I would be. I was. My brother was vegan 3 years before I was. It took me 3 years to listen to him. And I learned something very important from my brother, who's a plant-based nutritionist, who's doing a lot of groundbreaking work on the connection between plant-based diet and early addiction recovery outcomes. Before I was vegan, I did a lot of diets when I was like around 300 pounds. And all of them were ways of trying to cheat the system. And because I hated myself, I hated the way I looked, I hated the way I felt. When I decided to go plant-based, I moved in with my brother and he was creating this meal plan for me. And he said, this time I don't want you to make it about how much you hate yourself, right? Because when you do that, every time you go to the gym, you're gonna be reminded how much you hate yourself. Every time you eat whatever your diet is, you're gonna be reminded how much you hate yourself. So this time I want you to make it about how much you love yourself. Right? So every time you prepare a plant-based meal, every time you go on a hike, or every time you go to a gym, That's an act of self-care and self-love. And so every time that you do this, it's a self-affirmation of how much I love myself, how much I should be treating myself the way I love myself and deserve to be treated. And I have to take that same approach with activism. Right? I can make my activism about how much I hate animal agriculture, how much I hate that people are hurting animals, how much I hate that people are destroying the planet and destroying their health. Right? And every action I take, because I've been bearing witness for over 4 years. It's twice a week, every week for 4 years. That means that just for pigs, I've seen almost 3 million pigs go into a slaughterhouse. Right? If I was doing it about just because I hated seeing that, or I hated animal agriculture, I would have burned out a long time ago. I wouldn't have been able to get near the amount of photos that I've gotten out. I wouldn't have been able to work with Sean and help shoot his new film. But if I make it about how much I love animals, how much I love that I'm helping animals, helping save the planet, helping people find their health and happiness again. Every action, even going to a vigil, even though it's difficult, that's just reminding me I'm here. It's that difficult because I love them so much. I'm here, I'm helping the planet, even though it's hard because I love it so much. And that, I mean, again, this is just my opinion. I'm only saying it because it works for me, but that has worked wonders in terms of how I keep going, why I don't burn out, and why I'm still able to talk to people without getting so upset. And so I want to show you guys a video that I shot, just so you can get an example of what vigils are like. And you can see, if I don't know where you guys are living, but if you've never attended a vigil before, but most likely there's a safe group around you or near you. So just give me a second and I will switch it. How do you new share? Where is it? Are you guys seeing this black screen?
Not seeing anything.
I see a white screen, Bobby. Hey, Bobby, you still there?
Yeah.
We see a white screen, but that's all we see.
You guys only see a white screen? Oh, it says my screen sharing is paused. Oh, will you make me
Yeah, I did.
host again, I guess?
Yeah, I just made you the host again.
Okay, let me try that again. Sorry, guys.
It's all right.
You guys see this screen now? Tell me if it starts playing.
Yes, we got it now.
Sorry about that.
You'll have to unmute yourself if there's audio.
So first, thank you guys for watching that. And I know that I'm talking a lot about things like love and kindness, and that these aren't really scientific things that we can track, and therefore we can't say if this is working or not. But I've seen that 4 million times. And I still don't hate anyone. And again, I can't say if this is true or not, but I don't see how we're going to hate enough. I don't see how we're going to hate our way to a kind and compassionate world. Hate may be a great motivator for short-term change, but it doesn't last because it's exhausting. And where hate is exhausting, love is empowering. And I think it's the only way to create lasting positive change. So even though it's hard sometimes, right, just remember that the person you're talking to isn't your enemy. If you're an animal rights activist, you don't have a single enemy on this planet, not a single one. No slaughterhouse owner is your enemy, no farm owner is your enemy, and no slaughterhouse worker is your enemy. They're all someone you want to be vegan one day. They're all just somebody you want on your team one day fighting with you. And we don't get people to join our team with hate and anger. We get people to join our team with understanding and compassion and kindness. They're not villains. This is something that we were all conditioned to do. I ate meat for 30 years because I'm a 7th generation Texan and I'm a Jew. I grew up with barbecue and brisket, right? Didn't make me a bad person. I was making bad choices because I was conditioned to do so. And we have to understand that if we're going to be effective and get our message across and let people understand it's okay, you're not a bad person when I tell you this, right? And I don't think you're a bad person. In fact, I think you're a great person. And I think that if you join us, that we'll make you better and you'll make us better. Instead of saying that you're terrible for what you're doing and what you're doing is terrible and I hope one day you figure it out. And that's really my overall message here. And I know it's kind of basic and simple, right? Love and kindness. It just seems to, like, oh, whatever. It's kind of a hippie blah. But I can only speak from my perspective, and I have only seen evidence. I've never seen evidence of hate creating positive change. And so thank you guys for listening. And if you guys have any questions, I think we're going to do a Q&A after this. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. That was very powerful. Not only your talk, but the images. Yeah, and I think you do a great job of amplifying animal voices in that way, and appreciate you sharing your perspective on all of that. How can people keep up with what you're doing in LA Animal Save?
You can follow us on social media, both on Facebook and on Instagram, LA Animal Save. You can follow me at Bobby Said on Instagram. I'm on Facebook, but rarely. And if you have any interest in joining a Save chapter near you, there's almost 1,000 chapters worldwide. If you go to animalsavemovement.org, you can see if there's one near you, and most likely if you're in a major city, there is. And I'm not saying that you have to go to a vigil, right? I'm not saying that every vegan has to be an activist. I'm just saying, let's just consider what this world would be like if every vegan was an activist. And the power of going to a vigil is, it turns non-vegans, it gets non-vegans thinking about veganism, but even more importantly, it gets vegans thinking about activism. Because as vegans, that just gets us back to zero, because as a human species, we're supposed to be vegan, we're herbivores, it's what we're supposed to be. Right, but as vegans, we stop harming the planet, but as activists, we help others stop harming the planet, and therefore we help heal the planet. So if there's a moral high ground, veganism is the baseline, activism is the high ground. And again, activism is a lot of different things. You don't have to go to a vigil, you don't have to be a frontline activist, but just voice your viewpoints whenever you have the opportunity to do so, and do it in an understanding way. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, Bobby. That's kind of like how AAM started, was imagining a world where every vegan or everybody who respects animals were an activist and did amplify their voices and all these things. So really appreciate perspective. I feel so honored to have had two great perspectives, two great speakers speak here. I learned so much. I've been vegan and an activist for over 4 years, and I just feel like I'm learning all the time. I feel like I'm making mistakes all the time and growing from those mistakes, trying not to get too caught up in them. And I just appreciate a supportive community around us of awesome people. With that, if anybody has any questions for either of our speakers, let us know. You can either pop on and unmute yourself, or if you don't feel like being on camera, you can put it in the chat and we will get to it. I'll ask a question to get us started. So Bobby, I'll ask you, what led you to the forms of activism that you do? I know like every person has their own like special skills in their own lane and everything like that. I know with me, it was natural to edit videos because that's the kind of background I have from before I was vegan. Is that kind of like what happened with you, or can you just tell us your story when it comes to that?
Yeah, so I mean, I was a filmmaker before I became a vegan. I went, to Savannah College of Art and Design, got my degree in filmmaking and cinematography, and went to Southeast Asia and was shooting stuff for TV. And then when I went plant-based, I wasn't vegan yet, but when I went plant-based, a year had gone by, and I was speaking with my brother at SoCal Veg Fest, and I met a friend of my brother's, Jean Pierre. I don't know, maybe some of you have heard of him. He's a vegan nutritionist and lifestyle coach. He's been doing it for like 30 years. He's Walking Phoenix's trainer and life coach. He coaches Ellen and a lot of celebrities, even though he doesn't know who they are because he doesn't have a TV. And so I was talking to him, and this is like one of the kindest human beings you'll ever meet. And he said, he knew that I was a filmmaker and a photographer. He said, "Have you ever heard of this pig vigil thing that's going to be happening tonight?" I said, "I don't know what that is." He said, "Well, Sean Monson and Amy Jean Davis, they founded LA Animal Save, and they're going to be holding these vigils now where they go and they bear witness to pigs." And just because I knew who Sean Monson was is really why I wanted to go. Selfishly, that's just why I wanted to go. So he took me there, and like I said, the first time I saw that truck come around the corner, that was it. I went over to Sean and I told him that I was a photographer and a filmmaker, and he asked if I would photograph and film that first vigil. And I did, and I gave him the footage. And then the next vigil, he came up to me and asked if I would shoot his next film with him, and that was sort of it. So, I mean, like, just use what you know how to do. And photography and cinematography is for me. So, which is why I'm not the greatest speaker, because I usually just let my photos and my video do the talking for me. So.
Well, I would argue that you are a great speaker, but yeah, I definitely know what you mean. Like me being behind the camera and stuff myself, that's kind of like where I really prefer to stay if I can. But yeah, so I totally get that. But yeah, while we're waiting on some questions to come in, I'll ask Riki a question as well. So Riki, how do you deal with, I guess, like educating people on this stuff? Because I feel like sometimes I try to do it like with speciesist language and stuff like that. And a lot of times, the people that you're gently correcting are, sometimes they get like offended or something. And, I feel like I need to do a better job of talking to them because I'm coming off as offensive when I'm not trying to be. When I gently correct people, because I do think like non-speciesist language is important. Sometimes I still mess up too, so I'm never like judging someone else or anything like that, because I mess things up all the time when it comes to that kind of thing. In fact, Riki was so great with me because the original name of this talk was something else. And Riki was like, Actually, that's like kind of the language we should, not be using. And I was so appreciative that, Riki kind of like gently let me know that. So I was wondering if you had any advice just going forward for anybody who's trying to educate other people about this topic.
Well, the specific topics that I talked about today, I really only discuss with people who are already within the sphere of animal rights and animal activism, because these kind of concepts are not what I use to talk with people about the residents that I know personally and stuff. I use a lot more simple language when I'm sharing that particular information. So I really just remain matter of fact when I am presenting this type of information, and let people mull it over. If somebody takes issue with the information I'm presenting to them, or if they have an issue with how I'm suggesting that they might reframe a concept or a piece of language that's not really, if they've got an issue with it and they're not interested in reframing their language that way, then I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time trying to convince them to talk that way. That I'm just going to continue to put that information out there for those who are interested, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. I can speak to some of my mistakes on that. One is, or one thing that I'm going to try to do in the future is message people privately, because I think sometimes people feel called out if it's in a comment. That's a mistake that I made not that long ago, and I felt really bad about it because I didn't mean to embarrass the person or anything like that at all. And a lot of the people who are speaking like this are people who care about animals and honestly have put in a lot more work for animals than I have. And I'm just trying to like introduce these new ideas and stuff like that. And anytime you can send a voice message too, I think that helps too. Because I mean, that goes with any communication, because text is so hard to read, and I've definitely made mistakes when it comes to that. So just just telling people by my own mistakes, maybe what to avoid. But does anybody have any questions for either of our speakers? Feel free to just pop on or drop in the chat.
I'll chime in real quick, Trey.
Yeah, please do.
How's it going? Good. Yeah, this is pretty awesome. Interesting perspectives. I don't really have a question, just a comment. I think that it is correct that we should help each other and correct each other when we use speciesist language. Sometimes we don't realize it, and it's part of our own conditioning. So it is good to be made aware of that, and we shouldn't take offense to that for sure. For example, sometimes I'll say something grabs the bull by the horns, and then I'll catch myself saying that or something like that. So in that regard, I do agree that correction should be made. But then there are other things that it's not necessarily a correction. Like, for example, if I say voiceless, I understand that Riki kind of sees it differently. So that's a different perspective, but it's not necessarily a mistake that I'm making by saying voiceless. We just have two different perspectives, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, do you want to like elaborate further on what you mean?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to elaborate further on what you mean, like the voiceless thing?
Oh, well, what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to say is that there are ways to correct people when we use speciesist language, but for example, using the word voiceless, I'm just trying to make a distinction here that wouldn't necessarily be a correction, it's just a different perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I can help. I think just from reading the comments, Juan, I can help elaborate a little more just from what I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded to me like in your situation where you use it in outreach, you're speaking for those who are behind factory farm walls and who literally aren't given the opportunity to use their voice. Not that they don't have a voice, but they're more like not seen or heard because they're not given the opportunity. Whereas Riki was more, I believe, speaking about animals in sanctuaries who are given the opportunity to have and use their voice, and we need to amplify those versus using our own narrative to speak for them. Maybe I'm wrong. That's just what I interpreted.
100%. I think that we're on the same page. I think we all can agree that animals do have a voice. So an organization like Anonymous for the Voiceless kind of contradicts that idea that we all believe that animals do have a voice. So I totally get that. However, in our outreach and in our activism, we do explain that, and I do share that with my volunteers to make sure that we, let everybody know that the animals do have a voice, but their voices are suppressed. They are, I always like to tell people during my outreach, I say, look, if the animals could be out here picketing and protesting, and they would be, but they can't. So we're here on their behalf. So in a way, we are being their voice because they can't physically be out on the streets telling people, please stop harming us, to the general public. Now, I agree that they are speaking through their screams and through the eyes of that amazing photography that Bobby has. You can hear their voices even without any sound. So they absolutely 100% have a voice, but their voices can't be heard if they are sheltered behind, brick mortar walls, in my opinion. So it's just two different perspectives. I understand what Riki's saying, but I just want to kind of make that distinction that I think we can all agree that they have a voice, even though we might call ourselves the, Anonymous for the Voiceless. And that's how I kind of can make that distinction.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your comment and your contribution. I'm going to, if this the event page stays up, I am going to send links to both of the articles that I quoted from earlier. But I would definitely say that one of the messages that I'm trying to convey today is that framing activists and activist groups as voices for the voiceless does more harm than good to the animal rights movement as a whole, and ends up centering humans rather than the victims of oppression. And I think that some of the articles that I referenced earlier on in my talk do a really good and thorough job of explaining that. So I will try to link those in the event page for this talk if anyone's interested in reading that afterwards.
Yeah, and we'll link those in the YouTube as well when we post it. And I think these kind of things are just evolving all the time too. Like I've heard the founders of AV say, like, yes, we realize that, animals are not voiceless. And I think probably what happened is they named it that and then changed their mind afterward, and now it's already named that or something like that. That's probably, I mean, I don't know for sure, but our language and our viewpoints and all this stuff, I feel like they're shifting all the time. And I feel like that's a good thing because, we're never gonna stop learning. We're always like pushing things forward for animals, and yeah.
Absolutely, everyone's learning all the time.
For sure.
And I find sometimes like there's certain words that we can use when we're explaining things, or example, just, Anonymous for the Voiceless, like there's words that can be interpreted differently by everyone. So kind of like what Juan was saying, like it's really a question of perspective. Like there's even times that I've used certain words that, I wouldn't use around other people just to describe something, and it really hit home for that person. So I think it's like, I think it is a matter of perspective 100%, but I'd be interested in seeing those articles that you were going to share there, Riki. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Michelle, you put something in the chat about nonviolent communication. Do you care to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. Nonviolent communication was founded like a while back by Marshall Rosenberg, and he's like a peacemaker basically. And the whole principle is to talk from feelings and needs. So it's like it's not about like we were all raised and taught in a society that's about built on good and bad, punishment and reward. But the whole concept of nonviolent communication is like there is no right and wrong, kind of like what Bobby was saying earlier about the people that we see maybe as potential threats, or the people that we see as like the CEOs of slaughterhouses, the people that from an outside perspective, when you really think about it, or maybe when you don't think about it that much, it's like, wow, I can hate people very easily, right? But at the end of the day, it's not as much them that are responsible, if so much the brainwashing, the conditioning, all that kind of stuff. So when you start analyzing, or I wouldn't say analyzing, but observing from a perspective of feelings and needs, so understanding that we're all unique and we all have different needs, I think that's kind of like the whole concept of NVC. So it becomes a lot easier to be able to relate with people, because you don't see them as the enemy anymore. You just see them as a person, an independent, unique person that has specific needs. And those needs that they have are probably based on the environment they grew up in, or the experiences that they've had or gained. So it's just a really, really interesting thing to look into. And if you even go to the website, I'm pretty sure it's just nonviolentcommunication.com, or Nonviolent Communication Center. I could put the link after, I'll look it up really quickly. But you have like the charts for feelings and the charts for needs, and just becoming more and more aware with that kind of vocabulary is good for all of us, right? Like humans and non-humans alike. And it's really good to understand and practice self-empathy with ourselves as well. Like it kind of helps us understand that as well, because as animal rights activists, like we need to be able to practice self-empathy with ourselves at times, because it's normal that we get angry, right? Like with what's happening in the world, like it's really normal that we get angry. And I just want to tell Bobby, like, good on you, man, because I think that the hardest thing is bearing witness. I've done it countless amount of times, and I have to take breaks at times because it's like, it's too much for me, right? Like it's seeing them like that, heading to slaughter, and just knowing that, this is the last time, and trying to give them like a Ponopono technique, like, giving them as much love as possible. But like, it's hard to create those boundaries because it's really not easy to see. So good on you for sticking it out and being an organizer for the LA and all that and getting it done.
Thank you.
It's hard.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what you're saying. And it's even more that obviously we all have psychological, emotional, and physical needs, right? And generally when someone has an eating disorder, which a lot of Americans have, because a lot of Americans, standard American diet, they're obese, and it's just they're living on junk food and things. They're doing that because they have unmet needs. Not just that they have needs, but they have unmet needs.
Yeah.
And so they are sort of treating their unmet needs with the comfort that they believe they're getting from, say, fast food, which is what my problem was when I was overweight, right? When I would go to McDonald's or, Whataburger in Texas and get like double cheeseburgers and stuff, and go on my couch and eat them and play video games, right? That was comfort for me, unfortunately, because I was lacking any sort of real meaningful connection in my life. That was it. That was what I had. I could get pleasure from food and then play video games, right? And so it took me 3 years to change it and listen to my brother, because it took me 3 years to accept the idea that, okay, this comfort is artificial. My life has zero connection. It's almost bankrupt in terms of anything meaningful. And I have to say, okay, this is going to be really uncomfortable. I have to give up the only source of comfort that's in my life, right? And I have to accept that I won't have it for a while, and hope that what they're telling me is true, and that I'm going to love this new life eventually. And people don't generally want to change when they're in an uncomfortable place, which is unfortunate, because right now we have this sort of double-edged sword. We have COVID and people talking about zoonotic diseases, and we're getting this message out there. Okay, maybe we need to stop farming animals. We need to stop raising animal agriculture and raising animals for meat, because look what happens. And people are a little more willing to listen to that. However, at the same time, they've never been more uncomfortable and uncertain of their lives ever than they are right now. So we have this place where they're willing to listen a little more, but certainly less willing to change. And so it's about reaching people, understanding what that unmet need is, and trying to convince them that, you're not going to do this alone. You're going to succeed or you're going to survive, and convincing them that the reward is worth far more than the discomfort that they're going to experience for about a month or two. Right? But it's all about understanding that someone who's just a mean person, right? That's a person in pain. That's a person with unmet needs. That's not a mean person. People who aren't mean are doing it because they're not in pain, or at least as much or as often as someone who is. And so it's just about trying to have as much empathy and understanding where people are coming from, and that most people are not bad people. And every time I've gone into a slaughterhouse, I've expected to see a warehouse full of sociopaths, because that makes sense, right? I've only seen human beings that are being exploited. And it's hard to accept that, right? Who I thought was my enemy is actually a victim, especially in border states when they're undocumented workers that are being exploited. It's just about being willing to see past our preconceived ideas of the way that things should work. This person should be a monster because they work in a slaughterhouse. Oh, they're not. They're undocumented. They have a bunch of kids, and they're working horrible hours, and they've got terrible arthritis, and they can barely walk straight. That's generally what happens, because they're told to work in like freezers with like essentially gardening gloves, and they get to work for 6 months and then they're fired so that they never have to be given health insurance. Right? This nobody grows up wanting to work in a slaughterhouse. That person had no options. Most of them had no options. Again, we've all seen Dominion and things like that. We know that there are horrible people that just love hurting animals. We've seen it. We've seen people that are like kicking animals when they don't have to, and abusing them way beyond the abuse that they're already experiencing, right? But again, it's really not the majority, at least not in my experience, what I've seen. And it's just about, I can reach this person who is in a terrible spot. This person their life has not turned out the way they wanted it to. They're working in a slaughterhouse, right? I can reach them a lot better by being understanding to them than by saying, not only did your life not work out, you're a shit person. That's a terrible way to reach somebody. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't hold people to account. That's two different things. There's shaming someone and there's holding someone to account. Holding someone accountable for their actions, meaning that they have to understand that they are the result of their actions, because these are the choices you made, right? And I've seen it with my brother when he went through recovery. I experienced it when I had to accept that I was overweight, not because of my genes and not because of, my body was broken and all my friends who could eat McDonald's and have superhero bodies, they were just lucky. It was because I have to accept that I cannot eat that. I'm one of most people. If you eat 5,000 calories a day, you're going to end up overweight with diabetes and high cholesterol and heart disease, right? It's nobody else's fault but mine. I had held myself accountable to that if I wanted my life to change for the better. But I wouldn't have done it if someone was kept shaming me for it, saying, you don't shame a fat person at the gym. You don't shame people for trying, right? You don't shame people for listening. But you have to make them understand that you have to be accountable for the actions that you've taken. And the only way things get better is if you accept that you were making mistakes, right? And things will get better if we change our actions. You change your behavior, you change your life. That's essentially how it works for the most part. This is not a broad brush or anything.
Thank you, Bobby. We are coming up on like an hour and a half of talking. I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions if anybody has any burning questions. Last call for questions if you have one. Feel free to just pop on or drop it in the chat if you do have a question.
I have a question for Bobby. Being an organizer and being out there as much as you are, how do you avoid burnout? Like, are there any tips or tricks for constantly dealing with seeing these animals, you know, watching them go into the slaughterhouse? What do you have
Yeah.
any?
And, you know, I don't want what I was saying before to make it seem like, you know, I don't have sleepless nights or anything. I suffer from extreme PTSD. I have two counselors and a psychiatrist that I see, but those those are just for getting tools. And I got rid of my psychiatrist because I don't take medication anymore. And I just needed tools for me to get through my day. But the best thing that I've found, one, is positive outlets, right? I box. I was a junior Olympian when I was a teenager. And so I started boxing as a way of getting emotions out, but it's violent. And I don't want my only outlet to be violence. So I also read poetry. But the most important thing is having a community who understands what you're going through that you can be with, like whether it's a sanctuary with people that you know and like, and you can go and hang out with and do something positive and have, you know, take positive action and be of service to something in a positive way. But the most important thing is having people who understand what you're going through because they're suffering along with you. Like if you go to a vigil and I see people there for the first time and they're breaking down crying. Every time, I've never seen someone there go for their first time and not cry. And I have to remind them, I was like, I understand that you're crying, but I think what you need to be reminded of is you're paying a lot of attention to the pigs. You're only looking at the pigs. You're looking at all the suffering that's here, but this is a weird situation where we have both the worst and best of humanity happening at the same time. You need to turn around and see that there's 100 beautiful, compassionate people standing right there with you, who understand what you're going through, who will support you, who will say, you know, if you ever want to hang out, if you ever want to go get some vegan pizza or whatever, let's go. The first time I ever filmed with Sean, we filmed halal slaughter in a slaughterhouse in Pico Rivera. It's still the worst thing I've ever seen. And afterwards, I gave him the footage. I said, "Don't call me for 2 weeks." And I just sat in my room and I just tried to process it. That was the worst decision I could have made. Even with like the best mentor I could have asked for was Sean Monson, director of Earthlings, is my like mentor into filming undercover. I still made the worst choice you can make. What I should have said was, Sean, this is going to be really hard for me. Like, is it okay if I come over every once in a while? We can watch a movie, we can talk, we can hang out, something like that. Just having someone that knows what you're going through, has done it before, who isn't going to try and solve your problems, but they're just going to be there with you. I think community is the most important thing. But I mean, there's some things that you can't avoid. Like I still suffer from PTSD and things, and I don't know if maybe I will my entire life. I don't know, but having community helps. So
Thank you for sharing that, Bobby. I want to echo what he said and say, like, yeah, for sure. I know when I first went vegan and became an activist, I was living in rural Alabama, and there were not a lot of other vegans or like-minded people at first. I eventually started to find them, but that feeling of being alone is brutal, especially when, you know, there's so few of us to begin with. I think it's important we find each other and support each other and learn from each other. And I'm thankful for the fact that we were all able to do that tonight. If you haven't already, there is an animal activism mentorship community Facebook group where we can all stay in touch and talk about things and share different ways to get active, or, you know, just request support or whatever the case may be. So if anybody wants to use that as a space for that type of thing, please join. It's just a Facebook group, Animal Activism Mentorship Community. I think that's a great place to leave it. If there's anybody else that still has questions, I'm sure that Riki and Bobby wouldn't mind fielding those in their inbox when they have time to get to that. If you know of anyone that could have benefited from this talk, It will be on YouTube within 24 hours. We'll have it uploaded on the Animal Activism Mentorship YouTube page. Really appreciate everyone joining. Thanks so much for being here and, you know, wanting to further your knowledge on this so that we can be better advocates for animals and amplify their voices to the best of our ability. I appreciate you all. Keep a lookout for more free workshops like this one. So thankful to Riki and Bobby for being here with us today, and thankful for everybody who joined. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.